Right, y'all. Thank you so much for joining us for this workshop, for taking an hour out of your day when I'm sure things are very, very busy. But I appreciate you taking the time. I'm not going to take up too much of the hour. I want to make sure that Jason has as much time as he wants and needs. But in the way of an introduction, we're really grateful to have Jason Rodenbeck here. Running this workshop for us today. Jason is the Academic Accessibility and Program Support Associate Director at Kennesaw State University. Um, he has almost 2 decades of experience in higher education, with roughly 15 of those years as an instructional designer. And in his current role, he focuses almost solely on digital accessibility. Though he's not a scientist or a mathematician, digital accessibility in the STEM fields has been an ongoing focus of his work, and he's presented at the National Science Teachers Association Conference in Atlanta on STEM accessibility resources. So I'm confident that Jason has some really helpful and smart things to say today. Um, with all of that said, I will hand things over to Jason. And Jason, I'll keep an eye on the chat and interrupt you if somebody has a profound question or maybe a less
Sure. Yeah.
profound question. But otherwise, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate everybody coming, and I do want to try to make this as valuable for you as possible. I've been really passionate about accessibility, and I'll kind of share what my experience in working with STEM accessibility, why that became such a focus for our unit. The first thing I kind of like to do, though, because um, I end up meeting with lots of different groups of people, and it's kind of always a numbers game. How many folks are already familiar with digital accessibility? How many folks aren't? And maybe how much? I have a Mentimeter poll that I do, but I don't want to take too much time. If it might help me though, if you'd feel comfortable, maybe putting in the chat how if you feel very familiar, you know a lot about digital accessibility, or if you could say it's brand new, just found out about it last semester, um, etc. Would y'all mind kind of medium level? Okay, medium. Oh, I see. That was a QM. Okay, medium. All right. Novice. Okay, I appreciate the honesty. So it sounds like folks are brand new. Okay, there you go. Novice again. All right, that's helpful. I don't need to see everybody, but just to kind of get a feel for where we're at. I'm hopefully you're seeing my screen. Um, I've been in digital accessibility, purely in digital accessibility since 2020. It happened right at the start of COVID, and that was sort of we were all moving online, and there was a huge push for it at Kennesaw State. And you're gonna let me go. What ended up happening in 2024 is DOJ published a new regulation called non-discrimination on the basis of disability. And the reason I sent my presentation to Victoria earlier is not necessarily because I think that all of the information is so pertinent you want to save it forever, but there's a lot of links. So the links are what I always find are the most helpful. So if you want to know more about that, it's a new regulation, but I like to stop and clarify that um, it is not a new law. In fact, ADA, since the mid 90s, the ADA was considered to be applicable to digital content. Um, the the problem that we had is that there had been no specific standard for what it meant to be compliant. So we've known for 30 years that we have to make sure that we're not discriminating against people with disabilities in the digital environment, but nobody knew exactly what that meant. And so that was always being sorted out in the courts. Um, and so what DOJ had tried to address that several times, and it was just in April of 24 that they finally mandated a specific standard. The criticism of the rule has been that it's very it sort of takes a very hard line, says everything needs to be done in a couple of years, and it is not quite as carefully worded in how it makes exception for fields where we don't really have known solutions. Um, Here at KSU, we have a whole engineering college, and so we have architecture college, and so there are lots of applications and there are lots of types of content that we know we don't really know how we're going to make that compliant yet. So that has been, and I think the STEM field folks in math and science are also feeling that as well. So, also I should mention, please stop me for questions if you want clarification on something I said it didn't sound clear, or put it in the chat if you're more comfortable doing that. So the way the requirement the way the rule breaks down is that there's three basic requirements. The first is that it establishes the web content accessibility guidelines as the technical standard, with for web content and mobile apps. The technical standard now is WCAG 2.1. If you're familiar with digital accessibility, then you've heard WCAG before. It's kind of the gold standard. There's been many attempts to set different guidelines for what web content accessibility is. WCAG 2.1 is the one that's best known around the world. The second requirement is that state and local governments' web content, and the tricky part there is to determine what web content is. And they define it. These images, by the way, are from the DOJ's info page. They've got sort of a short info page about the rule. All that again is linked in the presentation as well. And they say usually that word is doing a lot of work for us there too. There are some exceptions. Typically, it tends to be things that are archived. Anything that we know people are supposed to be accessing, it probably does not count as one of those exceptions. And then web content itself is broadly anything that can be accessed through a web browser. So some of the questions that DOJ was asking were things like, well, what does that mean? Include anything that's behind a firewall, such as in your LMS? Does that include things like Word documents? They sorted through all those questions. A lot of people wrote in, a lot of comments, and end up basically being yes, pretty much everything, because Word documents, email, presentations, PDFs, our textbook or our e-textbooks, all of those things can be accessed through a web browser. So yeah, that it pretty much everything that we produce digitally needs to be compliant. And then the last of the three requirements is that our mobile apps, and I'm not quite sure why they stress mobile apps so much in the language. When you dig in, it's clear that basically all of our applications. So another wrinkle that adds for us is when we're working any publisher content we work with, any applications that we use, and that's academic and non-academic. So if your registrar's office is working with Banner or whatever registration tool that you use, if students are using it, if you're using it, then it needs to be compliant. And hopefully, if I don't run out of time, I'll be able to kind of go over some resources for how to review third-party apps. The rule is primarily written for state and local governments, but that's us as well. So it is inclusive of higher ed and school districts. Um, this was another piece that a lot of accessibility advocates were anxious about. The timeline given was not a lot, and so uh, we all know that sometimes in higher ed things can move at a glacial pace. So trying to turn the Titanic around in 2 years can be very difficult. And so I'll be honest, at our institution, even though in our online learning we've been focused on this for years, where most universities are at this point scrambling to figure out how to catch up. The truth is, I find it very difficult to believe that there are any institutions in the country that are going to be able to say, oh, yeah, we are 90% compliant with this by April 24, 2026. Most of that is we're making plans, we're figuring it out, we're trying to figure out how we're going to get compliant. Especially when a lot of faculty, a lot of our institutions may have 20 or 30 years of material that we're still using that took 20 years to develop, and turning that around and making it compliant could take another 20. So yeah, scope and reach. This was a part that a lot of us, when we first read this rule, we were initially a lot of us our jaws dropped a little bit, because even though we believe that being accessible is important and making sure we're not discriminating against students who want to read the content but maybe can't, I usually say to folks, especially when I find folks that are kind of anxious or maybe even resistant to doing this, hey, you've got students that you're begging to read your syllabus, you're begging to look at the textbook. Here we have students that really want to and maybe can't because our content hasn't been set up properly for them. And so that's kind of one of those pieces where I'm always saying, hey, let's make sure that we're on board with this. Uh, but I also knew that this was going to blow up a lot of this was going to get a lot more attention because the scope is larger than just the website and your online courses. Any department at your institution, any communication that you do. So if it's within your department, and you're sending out messages to all your students in a specific program, those communications also need to be compliant. So all departments that create digital content that is distributed will need to make sure it meets the WCAG 2.1 standards. Communications, we get stuff from our administration that I'm finally having meetings with folks going, hey, these emails, an image of an invitation is some people can't read that. And then, of course, any applications we use. And then we, on the academic side, knew that while our online faculty definitely understand this better, we also realized that there are a lot of our traditional faculty that rightly make use of digital content, and those published content and third-party content from traditional faculty also need to be addressed. So we recognized immediately that there's an urgency for accessibility resources, especially for the unique challenges in the STEM and in the arts. So talk a little bit about WCAG and try to give you sort of that 10,000 foot overview of how WCAG works and how it translates into activity and how it helps. Um, the Web Accessibility Initiative is who publishes WCAG, and their sort of summary is that it makes content more accessible to a wider range of people with disabilities, including accommodations for blindness and low vision, deafness and hearing loss, limited movement, speech disabilities, photosensitivity, and combinations, or some combination of learning disabilities and cognitive limitations. So on the one hand, it's trying to make sure that content visually is has multiple can be seen by people with some visual disabilities, but also making content, optimizing content for use with uh, assistive technologies. WCAG, I always tell people if you're not a computer nerd like me, then it's not something we usually tell just typical users to go and try to read, unless you're trying to get to sleep. But it's a fairly long, fairly technical document, and it's broken down into four principles, and those are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So anything that falls under the perceivable principle is going to be perception issues. So um, dealing with disabilities of visual disabilities, hearing disabilities, etc. Operable is going to have to do with can this be accessed with assistive technology? Can it be navigated? Understandable is going to be about things like predictability, making sure that there's a logical structure. And then robust has to do on the really, it's a back end issue. Is the technology um, is the technology compatible with the assistive technologies that people use? So, assistive technology could be anything from a screen reader to a braille reader to there are assistive technologies that allow people who are paralyzed to be able to use their mouth or a device that they're pointing at with their mouth to navigate the internet or to read documents, etc. There are 13 guidelines, and they're all 1.1 to 13.1 that may make appearances in multiple of these principles. So 1.1 is an example of a guideline in the perceivable principle, and that is text alternatives. So that means that when you have an image, that you've added an alternative text to that image that can be read to describe that image to that person. Operable is going to be how you make your content keyboard navigable. So 2.1 is keyboard accessible. Am I adding a heading structure to a document that allows a student the way a sighted person reads a document, right? Especially if it's a fairly long document, if I want to get to a certain section of that document, I'm going to scan through those headings to make sure to find the content that I'm interested in. Well, if we don't set those headings using a CSS tool or in Microsoft Word, where we go up to the styles menu and add an H1, H2, H3, etc., then a person that's using a screen reader may have to listen to that entire document just to find that one piece of information that they needed down on page 13. So we add a heading structure so they can pull that up and listen to those headings and navigate to the section that they want. Excuse me. 3.2 is predictable. That means it's got a logical structure to it. And these are all just examples. They're not the whole thing. But the idea there is if a student opens up a course and every page has a completely new menu option, then they're using a lot of cognitive load just to figure out the structure and where things are every time they walk into a new room. If it was completely a different structure, then there's less opportunity for them to learn. And so people with learning disabilities may suffer more, or somebody with dyslexia who has to take longer to read anyway. That ends up being an undue burden. And then, of course, we talked about compatibility with assistive technologies. There's three levels of conformance then. So each one of these guidelines is going to break down into success criteria, and those have three levels of conformance. Level A is going to be the lowest, most essential level. In other words, it's addressing issues that a student with a disability would not be able to get anything out of this if we don't do this, the most essential pieces. Level AA, which is the standard we have to reach. So we have to reach level A and AA. That's the required standard. That typically, if you're doing level AA, most folks are going to be able to access your content. And level triple A, which most VPATs don't measure, but level triple A is kind of considered above and beyond. The last piece of this slide here is an example of one of the 78 success criteria. This is under the perceivable principle. It's 1.2.2 captions, and that's for pre-recorded video, and that's a level A criteria. Captions are provided for all pre-recorded audio content in synchronized media, except when the media is a media alternative for text. So it's longer. It goes into detail of when and how you need to use it. But they call that a level A because a person who's deaf, if there's audio, if there's timed audio in the video, they would not be able to access that without adding those captions. So in our unit, we've tried to, we know we don't want to try and send people to WCAG and a faculty member who's got research projects and they've got 4 classes and they've got all these responsibilities. We know it's not reasonable to send everybody to WCAG and say, try to figure out how to make your course compliant with this. So we've boiled it down to a basic 4 set of habits. And it boils into 4 things: document structure, alternative text, media accessibility, and looking for accessible applications. Document structure has, and we should stop and and define what we mean by document here. A document can be Word, it can be an HTML file, it can be a web page, it's a PowerPoint presentation. If you're sharing those as files, it can be a PDF. Probably the hardest to remediate are PDFs. So anything, basically any kind of file that you're passing on information on. And so that boils down to 5 habits. One is semantic structure. I talked about heading structure a little bit ago, making sure that, especially when you've got a longer document, if that document is in sections and students are not supposed to just read it straight through, then they need to be able to go into the section that they need. They need that heading that tells them what is under this information. Using proper list styles. Now, most applications, if you start trying to create a numbered list, it's going to automatically assume that you're creating a numbered list. Don't undo that, because the way a student using assistive technology listens to a list, that assistive technology is going to tell them that they're entering a list. If it's an outline with sub lists underneath it, it's going to tell them that it's inset and this line is structurally a part of this construct in the outline. So use proper list styles. Use the tools of whatever platform you're using to create those list styles. Using tables properly is important. We always say we don't use tables for formatting. So a lot of folks, we get into habits where we create a table because we want a page to be formatted a certain way visually. However, when assistive technology comes up to a table, it wants to read it as data. And that's harder for a student using assistive technology to navigate. It may look visually, it may have a good visual logic, but a computer is not, assistive technology is not going to access it the same way. Using proper text color, so making sure that the text has enough contrast against the background. We've got tools that we can point you to for how to ensure that there's proper color contrast. Accessibility checkers generally get this. Microsoft has accessibility checkers. Many platforms now have accessibility checkers, and they'll tell you if the text doesn't have enough contrast. Also, really important that we don't use color to convey meaning alone. So I've seen faculty realize, oh no, I've been telling my green team to look at the information that I've colored green, and my red team to look at the information that I've colored red. And if somebody in their class has red green color blindness, they don't have a way of differentiating between those two things. So we don't use color alone to indicate meaning. And then descriptive links. If I'm reading a document as a sighted reader and I come up against a great big long link that's got 4 lines on it, I visually skip that because I'm not interested in a bunch of gobbledygook. Um, when we create a link in a document, we need to type our information and then hyperlink that and use descriptive text. So we don't say click here because that doesn't tell the user anything about what they're clicking on. You say if I was going to send you this presentation, I would say Jason's accessibility presentation. Download Jason's accessibility presentation, and that's the descriptive link. Of course, alternative text is the next piece, and that's wherever we're using images that you have that you make sure that there's a description written in the alt attribute for charts and graphs. And this is an issue in the STEM field that makes things more difficult. We frequently have very complex graphs, and so or charts or all kinds of complex illustrations. And typically, a screen reader is only going to read about 100 to 120 words before it just stops reading in the alt attribute. So there have to be creative ways to add a long description in the text of the document somewhere that allows the student to get that fuller description. Again, please stop if I'm going too fast. I'm trying to cover a ton of stuff, but I want to make sure if there's something that you want more clarification on, I can get it for you. The next piece is media. So that's going to be, if you do audio recordings, most folks do video nowadays. It's just so easy to do video. Then a transcript is necessary. For video, closed captioning is pretty easy. Do y'all have Victoria? I don't remember if you told me what video. Do you have a video platform you use at Chattanooga?
Heather, jump in and tell me if I'm wrong. We use
Okay,
Kaltura
Kaltura. So
yeah.
we use Kaltura as well, and Kaltura's auto captions are the best I've seen. So, but we find that Kaltura auto captioning, it's going to depend on the speaker, how clearly they speak. I'm stopping myself halfway through every sentence, and so I get some really interesting auto captions. And sometimes it depends on if the speaker has a heavy accent that the AI can't pick up. So it's pretty easy to edit those. So we recommend trying to edit those for at least up to 95%, if not 100, if you can get there. And then also a piece that closed captions is level A, but audio descriptions is an extra file that can be added. That's level AA. And audio descriptions are a separate file that can describe any visual content that is not being described in the audio. And I'll talk here in a few minutes. I'm going to talk about third-party applications, how to review third-party applications and publisher content to make sure that it's compliant as well. I flew through a lot there. Um, I, there's a page linked on the end of the presentation that goes to our page called the Basic Four, and it goes into a lot more detail. And there are links to examples and links to how-to resources on there as well. So please feel free to look at that. Basic Four is Basic Four was kind of my sort of baptism by fire into digital accessibility, and by the time I felt like I had mastered that, um, I think um, I think it was us when we were talking a few minutes ago, Victoria. I feel like I'm getting to the age that I don't remember uh, if I said something 5 minutes ago or if I said a week ago. We were talking about the in the English department. There's a certain set of challenges. Um, in the STEM fields, there's a lot more. Um,
That was our chat right before we started.
yeah. Okay. Good.
I'll tell you, having young kids has done that to me. I can never remember what I've said. So
In PowerPoint is putting image descriptor. So actually, Brendan, that is not a bad idea. So I have, especially for larger images or more complex images, I have put in the alt text of the image, um, long description in the slide notes, the notes for this slide, and they should be able to navigate to those notes to get to get the more detailed description. Um, but that's I've never seen any other experts say that, but that's been a solution that I've used. So so I got pretty good at Basic Four. You're welcome. And then I got called to help with a faculty member who teaches business calculus. And I don't usually say this to my science and math colleagues because I don't think it engenders a ton of respect for me from them. But I was the guy that chose a field because I was afraid of math and science. And so I remember thinking, I feel inadequate to help with this. What it was there was a young man in her course who was using a braille reader, and if you can see the image here, a braille reader, it uses screen reader technology. This is his interface with all digital content, and so it converts anything he's reading, any document he's reading, a web page he's reading, into lines of braille that he can read with his fingers, and then he can type in braille, type responses, etc. And so she had done in her course what a lot of people have done, and that is they've built documents and resources um, with a print logic in mind. So this makes a lot of sense. It's visually organized, and on a visual level, it makes sense. You know, I've got graph, function characteristics, and then the student will write the equation. Well, she'd uploaded all of these in here, and this is a Microsoft Word paper. She just created a table, and then she was dropping in um, screenshots of these graphs. Well, all of a sudden she gets a letter from Student Disability Services that says, wait a minute, these don't have any alt text. And she goes, how do I write alt text for a graph? And also I've got 400 of these. And I remember going and meeting with her and this kid, and I thought, we've got to figure out solutions. So she worked so hard for that student that semester, and I'll tell you, bravest kid I ever saw. I just as I went to my office and said, I repent of my fear of the math and science, because this kid is completely blind and he's not afraid of taking business calculus. Um, yes, there's an accessibility checker. All the Word has an accessibility checker. Um, we ended up finding a solution to make accessible graphs, and it's called a Desmos graphing tool. So it's linked on this slide. Desmos is a free tool, and anybody can go and create these accessible graphs, and then you can link. What she ended up doing, what several of our faculty now are doing, is they'll create an accessible graph in Desmos and they'll save it, and then they'll add that link to their image or their in their document and say, um, see the accessible graph here. Um, and that makes it so that somebody that's using that software can go and read that graph. So that was when we started our research, trying to. That's when I realized um, we are not well equipped on the STEM in the STEM fields here, because I realized that there was just not there was nothing for her to turn to. And so we actually started researching. We tried to understand the gaps, spent some time trying to even understand how somebody that is disabled experiences math and science. And so there's a link on this slide if you get a chance to check it out. It was me demonstrating using Apple's VoiceOver. How does a student end up experiencing um, um, math as screen readers reading it? And so VoiceOver reads it out loud. Part of what we keep running into again is sort of that print logic versus digital logic. So in that particular video, it looks a little bit more like this, where I've got somebody will put a problem at the top of the page, but then they'll have different answer options in a table. And that, on the one hand, visually makes a lot of sense, but that's sort of still thinking in print logic. Um, it's the person that's having to read this would then have to jump in and out of that table to go back and forth to read the problem outside of the table, and then try to figure out which of the answers in the table was correct. So the video explains it a little bit better. And then we began to build our STEM accessibility resource page. I'm going to actually go to that real quick. Um, this is that page, and it's not as impressive as it once was, because a lot, every now and then you go back to a resource you created, a sort of collection of resources, and find that, oh, some links are gone now. But this, again, is also linked. You can also, it's go.kennesaw.edu/AWA STEM. And we've tried to collect as many resources as we can for some of the different fields. And then we have to go back through every now and then and add more that we find, and sometimes remove old links. But several resources we found lately, I assume a lot of folks are using LaTeX to create math content. We've been trying to find ways, plugins that we can use for LaTeX to help create accessible PDFs. Then we also have several topical STEM resources. So for chemistry, we've found accessible chemical diagrams, etc. And then some of them are just going to be articles. We've got a lot more mathematics and chemistry than we do some of the other pieces. We're a little short on computing and nursing and physics resources. So we're trying to build that out. If you have stuff you want to share with me, I'd be glad to add it and we can share that. But please feel free to make use. That there may be resources that are available. I did mention to Victoria a little bit ago, we were looking to purchase Equatio for a long time, which actually is a great tool for math and has some chemistry functionality as well. It also incorporates Desmos, which I was just talking about a few minutes ago. All right.
Hey, Jason, any biology
Yeah.
specific resources?
I'm trying to remember. I think we did, and I believe they got, we lost them. They had, but we need to start building that up again. Our unit's been really busy this semester. very busy. But yes, and I'm sure there's folks there that could help. I'd be even willing to do try to help you find resources as well. Please take my email too if you want. I'll make sure I get it to y'all. So this was another example of a. This was wasn't really a STEM field; it was a finance field. But we had a, a faculty member that had created just tons of these sort of screenshots of financial equations, and we put together. Our team worked a long time to recreate these equations all in Word using Microsoft Word's equation editor, convert that to linear, and just dump that into the alt text of all of these images using a PDF remediation tool. And by the end of that project, we were not really feeling like we wanted to do that again. But we had, I guess, all of that to say, we know we've experienced a lot of these issues. This is an example of a document. A lot of our faculty are are using LaTeX to produce these PDF resources, and I if you've spent a lot of time with LaTeX, it it there are some plugins that you can get for LaTeX that will that will add math language that will convert those equations, etc. But um, no, not many people have been able to get them to work yet. I'm trying to tell folks that if you're going to create a test like this, where you've got, directions, you may find just using Microsoft Word and the equation editor to be a reasonable alternative, because that does create digital accessible math. It is time consuming. Um, so one type of tool and this is a tool we just purchased. I know that it's not something that is I realize now that it may not be something that y'all may or may not have access to it at some point. Um, and I'm trying to find my other window here. Oh, there you are. So this is an example of a math document that a faculty member had uploaded. And there are some tools like UJA Panorama. I know the other tool I was talking about is Equatio. It has the ability to even convert handwritten math, or this type, you've got some typed math. This is just a scanned document. And so what I wanted to show you is under the math formats, I was able to, let's see, is this my, nope, that's my math text. Oh, I think this is what I wanted. So it was able to convert that into digital math, that this could then be read by a screen reader. So again, this is UJA Panorama tool that's doing this. That can make pretty quick work of it, depending on the content that you have up front. For bigger things like chemistry and when we've got chemical uh, diagrams or biological diagrams, etc., we have to have different tools. But there are tools available, and we are continually trying to add them to our list of resources. So what STEM faculty should be looking for, I think, are ways to convert complex math, ways to convert complex diagrams, complex graphics, etc. Um, and then ensuring that the text content that you have is readable and navigable, and that any images that you have. I'm going to show you I'll show you some resources here in a moment. This is the go.kennesaw.edu/AWA STEM. That's our STEM accessibility hub. The last piece I'd like to go over with you is how you review a third-party publisher or application for content. So there's really two pieces of that. One is making sure that you've looked at any accessibility statement. Hopefully, if you've done QM, then you know to go find accessibility statements um, for all technologies in your course. If you're using things like Alex or Macmillan or any of the publishers, they're going to have an accessibility statement somewhere. I'll show you a list that's also linked in here where we've tried to collect as many accessibility statements and VPATs as possible. Typically, that's going to help you get a feel for what's their approach to accessibility, what are they doing, if they have any known limitations, and then where your students can go if they run into problems with that technology. You can feel free to look at all of these accessibility statements here. These are just some samples. I'm going to also show you our other page here. Um, the the most important thing I want to show you is the voluntary product accessibility HIPAA. I'll go ahead and open one here in a second. Um, the if you are concerned about, let's say I want to look at my textbook and make sure that this text package is compliant or find out where it's not. Then what you need to do is find their voluntary product accessibility template. Frequently, you can just Google search Macmillan VPAT, and it's going to be the first thing that you find. But a VPAT is almost always formatted according to WCAG. It's got a specific. Am I mute? Did something happen? Oh, okay. It's got a. Okay, you frightened me there. It's got a specific template. And let's just jump to my list of VPATs here. You can jump to any of these. Look, we can open, let's see. Let's open Cultura Media Space and open their VPAT. All right, so the way a VPAT works is it actually tells you, let me zoom in here. Not quite that far. There we go. So it actually tells you what it's checking against. So in this case, it's checking against web content. Well, it's checking against these three versions of WCAG, but it's checking level A and level AA. It's not bothering with level AAA. These are the terms. So it supports, it partially supports, it does not support. And then as it goes down every one of the criteria, and it tells you where it supports, if it supports that particular criteria, or in these case, partially supported. So this is a case where it says integrations of breakout rooms are partially supported with a few items still not fully aligned. So what that tells you, if you're looking at maybe a Macmillan VPAT, it may say that there are some questions, this type of question is not keyboard accessible, then you may say, well, I won't use that particular type of question then, because I want to make sure that it's going to be accessible. So here you have, they're still saying apparently whiteboard and breakout rooms are still not, it's not keyboard navigable. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, we've got a large section here of VPATs that are available that we've already done the searching, but it's pretty simple just to go into Google and just say, give me that VPAT, and you should be able to find out pretty quickly. Some resources such as Macmillan and McGraw-Hill, you can just request it and they'll send it to you, and they've always been real responsive with us. So how am I doing on time? 10 minutes. That is what I had prepared. We have, oh yeah, how do I use a VPAT? Again, if you haven't decided to use the product yet, then I always say, hey, if they don't have a VPAT, that's not a good sign. But I also look for those VPATs that if they have several does not support, maybe I want to avoid it. But just knowing what the limitations are can help you decide, can I work around the limitations, etc. These are all just more resources. Again, you can see our basic 4 pages is there, our STEM resource page. We do have some self-paced accessibility training resources. Our workshops are behind our firewall, but our self-paced stuff is all available. And I have one that I think is helpful for folks in STEM fields on writing alt text for complex images and graphs. And so we actually go through several pieces of advising on just writing alt text in general and draw a conclusion about what's the best way to add alt text for really difficult, complex images. All right. Any questions? I realize I'm flying through that, and hopefully this has been helpful on some level. Do you have any questions you'd like to try to?
Well,
I
guys,
think.
put questions in the chat or feel free to unmute and just ask Jason directly. I'm happy to mediate or just kind of step aside. And I'll go ahead and say we're scheduled until 2, and so if anybody needs to jump off to get to the next meeting or a class, please don't feel awkward about doing that. I'll keep recording, and we'll share the recording afterwards.
Yeah.
Just in case we lose anybody, I'll say thank you again for your time. But please stick around and ask your questions. I am free as long as Jason is, at least until 3:15. Um,
Overall, how close do you think book publisher digital content? So, I have been, full disclosure, and without I realize that this is a professional environment. I have been routinely discouraged by
oh wow.
publisher content. I, I I don't know. They need to be scrambling, and what my hope has been from publishers is that enough of us make noise to the publishers that they get behind it. Now, I've worked with folks from Macmillan, I've worked with folks from Alex, and I know that they've got teams of people that are working on making that digital. Those especially the sort of like those uh, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Topic specific modules. They are working really hard to make those compliant, um, but it hasn't been as fast as I would like. Um, and so, again, that's why I recommend. Well, I recommend looking at the VPAT, but then also contacting the publisher themselves. They do respond, and they will talk to you because they need you to keep assigning their texts to your students, and so they will talk to you. And so I know that they're working on it. Um, okay, I'm still wanting to get the first because there were two parts of that first question. I don't, as far as the April mandate, I am trying to encourage people. We've been in a weird position where we're wanting people to panic enough to take it seriously, but we're not wanting them to panic enough that they think there's just no way we can do this. The I don't know what to expect is going to happen in April. I don't expect DOJ to come streaming down all of our. I really don't know right now, even with the current administration, how much focus they're going to put on it, um, which is why we're all saying, let's be respectful of ourselves, let's treat ourselves with kindness, and try to have a logical approach. Here's our plan. Here's where our known issues are, and here's what we're working with publishers. We're working with our vendors. We have vendors that we know that they're not ready yet. They're not going to be ready till next year. So we're just writing that stuff down. Chemical drawings, um, whatever. The one link that I've got on my, and I think hopefully I stopped sharing. Yes, the link that I had on that page for chemistry graphics, I would go there and start and see how they what their approach is, um, for for sighted users and for non-disabled people. We kind of have to trust the accessibility experts to say yes, this has been remediated, this is readable with a screen reader. We have to trust the checkers, because I'm always telling people, no, don't try to get a screen reader and try to read this yourself, because a screen reader is a very difficult piece of technology to use, and if you don't use it all the time, you're probably not going to be able to really do adequate use testing. Third-party app stated this: the Code Lab LMS student client is compatible with WCAG 2.1a and strives to be. Yeah. So I that's a great question, Brendan. And my recommendation is just being in communication with them. So it's to me it's encouraging when the vendor is saying, here's where we're at. It means that they're not ignoring it. They're not pretending and they're also acknowledging we're trying to get here. So I would contact them. The question we're asking to our vendors is, okay, how compliant are you? What's your plan for getting there? If we know that, if we can tell DOJ when they come, hey, we know this is a known issue, they're telling us they're going to be compliant by such and such, then that's the first thing I do before trying to go and say, am I going to just upend my course and completely switch to a different product? I've run into that too sometimes, John. We've have you we've scheduled we've had more um, I push back on questions that are fake and say, hey, I need to be I have to be WCAG 2.1 AA compliant, and if you can't get me there, that puts me in a pickle. So we push back, and we've gotten meetings with teams of folks from different publishers before, and been able to get some promises, etc. Yeah, I'm glad, Brendan. That's helpful. Yeah, yeah. Thank you all. Those are good questions. I know it may sometimes I say, was I able to avoid that question thoroughly enough for you?
Any other questions from the group? I don't want to cut us short if somebody's typing. So I've visited a couple of departments. I'll say this just in case there's a question that is being formed right now. I visited a couple of departments to say that I've spoken with UT General Counsel about the WCAG standards and what it means for us as far as Canvas presence goes. And he really reiterated the reasonable effort at reasonable cost piece, right? Demonstrate that you're making progress, demonstrate that you are learning, demonstrate that you're making the effort. Um, I think as a campus, we will learn a lot in this process, and we will have to kind of figure out what programs we really should be more familiar with, and what processes need to become part of creating content for our classes. To speak with our general counsel, he said, the bigger concern, like the bigger immediate concern, is our public-facing websites because those are sites that outside groups can just kind of scan and say, "Oh, I gotcha." And our flagship school, UT up in Knoxville, has been hit by a couple of those. But he said in every case, UT just was kind of like, "Yep, you got us," and they made everything accessible, and everybody moved on with their lives. The difference that we're kind of stressing, and I think Jason, you did a really clear job of stressing this as well. Um, you know, say you come into class in the fall and you get a request to, this item is not accessible, it needs to be made accessible. Canvas is not a public facing site. It's an intranet kind of setup. And when that request comes in, it's likely a student who wants to do well in the class. And so, for those who are here and who are maybe watching the recording later, I'll stress two things. One, I've supervised people in my career in their 30s, 40s, 50s, further on in their lives who have found themselves disabled and
Mhm.
learning to advocate for yourself in your 30s and 40s and 50s and beyond is a really hard thing to learn to do. And I think it's a really tall order for someone 18 to 22 who is also maybe learning how to do laundry for the first time. And so, as much as we can avoid putting them in that position, we want to aim for that. Now, that we might think of that as like the perfect that we're aiming for, right? That we maybe work towards for quite a while because this is a complicated thing and there's a lot of work that goes into this. Um, so that's one thing to keep in mind. And the other thing to keep in mind is that requests for accessibility might come in a couple of different formats. So the student might come directly to you and say, I need this thing made accessible. If that happens, then you want to bring the Office of Equal Accessibility and Equal Opportunity and Accessibility into the conversation. And you're welcome to bring the Disability Resource Center or the Walker Center into that conversation. The Walker Center is more than happy to help. But EOA is going to be necessary to bring into that conversation because they can offer you all the resources that you could possibly need to figure out how to do this right. Um, Now, the student might not come directly to you. They might go to the DRC because they have an established relationship with the DRC. In that case, the DRC would contact you and EOA, right? And just make sure that that process is underway. The student might go directly to EOA, and in that case, they are going to bring you into the conversation as quickly as possible. So know that it's not necessarily, if any of that happens, it's not a student trying to go around you or get you in trouble or whistle blow or anything like that. It's very likely just a student going through the process that was outlined for them. And any of those kind of paths are reasonable paths. Um, so just know, these requests might come up, and in most cases with a Canvas course, they're going to come up for genuine reason and very unlikely going to come up because someone is trying to pull a gotcha. Um, but just know the question of how to make that thing accessible is something that you've got several departments who will jump in and help you with. You want to be proactive as much as possible instead of reactive when it happens. But I'll say that the Walker Center is aware that that's a tall ask when it's possible that we would go several years without you ever getting a request like this, right? But with all that said, I think stress reasonable effort at reasonable cost and progress over time. This will
Mhm.
be a learning curve for everybody, but you do have a lot of offices at your disposal who can help you out.
I would add to that on the public facing side. I the I could pull it up for you, but if you've got publicly available, maybe you've put course information on YouTube, or you've put course lectures on YouTube, ensuring that your captions are accurate. I think it was MIT settled a
Oh,
lawsuit where some wasn't even a student; it was somebody out in the public that
oof.
a professor had not captioned their videos, and so MIT settled.
Mm,
Um, so I would keep I tend to utilize internal hosting sources for the academic content. A lot of folks like to have their stuff out there because it's kind of it's part of my resume.
hmm
It's out there. It's my portfolio is out on YouTube, and that's great. But make sure that you've got edited caption files for that, so that
Nice,
that's out there. So I
nice.
appreciate
And
y'all
we,
come though. This has been nice to meet you all.
yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Jason.
Thank
Um,
you.
To those who are still here and those watching the recording afterwards, I really appreciate your time. And please know that the Walker Center is here to help you out. And if you have not yet, you might sign up for our accessibility course that Heather Thatch designed for us. It's a completely asynchronous course available in Canvas. You can sign up at any time. Um, It'll get you in a lot of disciplines 80, 90% where you need to be. And then there may be sticky things that come up later that we're here to help you with. We estimate that class takes about 2 to 3 hours to complete, and we are paying faculty $50 to complete it. Um, We do realize that after taxes, that $50 will probably buy you a drink at Starbucks, but hopefully it's a symbolic thank you, if nothing else, and a way to kind of get you in the door to learn some of the basics here. But we're appreciative of your time, whether you're spending it here or in that course.